during this lecture and after studying this module, you should be able to know what positive psychology is, who started it, and why it came into existence. You should also be able to learn the significance of positive psychology in contemporary times, identify the core thrust areas of positive psychology, and also analyze the significant trends for the future of positive psychology. First, let's define positive psychology. Psychology, since its inception as a school of scientific inquiry, has focused primarily on pathology and its treatment. Few years back, this traditionalist approach of pathology by psychology was challenged by the then president of American Psychological Association, Martin Seligman and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. They evaluated and summarized psychology as, and I quote, "We believe that a psychology of positive human functioning will arise, which achieves a scientific understanding and effective interventions to build thriving individuals, families and communities." Unquote. This was the advent of positive psychologies and new scientific inquiry into human behavior came into existence. It became a branch of psychology with its focus on improving mental functioning of human beings above that of normal mental health. Scientists involved in this field involved themselves in investigations into happiness of humans and deriving the quotients that would aid humans to lead a fulfilling and contented life. As noted by the pioneers of this area, in 2000, purpose of this scientific inquiry was to understand and foster the factors that allow individuals, communities and societies to flourish. For various problems human behavior present, these scientific inquiries allow us to evaluate and adopt mechanisms to come to the aid of human beings individually and as a society. This new science aims at developing an understanding, testing, discovering and promoting factors that create a better environment for individuals and communities to grow and flourish. It focuses on well-being, happiness, flow, personal strength, wisdom, creativity, imagination and characteristics of positive groups and institutions. Positive psychology, thus, as the name suggests, lays emphasis on factors that help people and society to flourish as opposed to the pathological causes of languishing. Let's first have a look at the brief history of positive psychology and how it came into the being. Living in 20th century has increasingly become difficult and stressful, with wars and revolutions in first half of century and second half has put us in confrontation with pan-global concerns of terrorism, economic slowdown, global warming, mega natural disasters and many others. Human beings individually and as a society has been going through this phase with decreased social support and leading to a sense of loneliness and hostility. In such times, it has become increasingly evident that we need a science which can aid and support us to cope better and resume the sense of life in positivity. Birth and growth of positive psychology is less than 2 decades has given us a science which holds us to a prospect for better living. With its ardent focus on testing subjects on happiness, well-being, personal and good life, it germinates an environment for us to gyrate towards positive living. Positive psychology in its most recent edition is the ever-growing discipline of psychology. It has a few earlier references. We also have a few earlier references to positive psychology. Let's look at them. One of the criticisms of applied positive psychology is that the prepositions are not new. Abraham Maslow used positive psychology as a term several decades before Seligman. It, though, has been to Seligman's credit to bring various past works of this science into forefront. Seligman did a good job of making the thoughts and ideas of past researchers, philosophers relevant and available to current times, almost like resurrecting positive psychology. Some of the earlier researchers who were looking at the idea of good life before the discipline of positive psychology evolved divided into 4 categories. The first one to propose was Aristotle. Aristotle's work on morality, virtue and a good life was greatest contribution to philosophy. Common thread in all his work on these subjects was the highest good for all humanity is eudaimonia or happiness. Ultimately, his work argued that although pleasure may arise from engaging with activities that are virtuous, it is not the sole aim of humanity. The second aspect which speaks about the presence of positive psychology is utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham constructed this as a philosophy, a stream carried forward ably by John Stuart Mill. It is propagated that the right act and or policy by government will affect the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It is also termed as the greatest happiness principle or the principle of utility. It was the initial sector to attempt measuring happiness, creating a tool composed of seven categories, assessing the quantity of experienced happiness. Utilitarianism proved against the generally prevalent belief that happiness indeed was measurable and ably demonstrated it to be so. Pawelski and Gupta proposed that utilitarianism influences some areas of positive psychology today, such as subjective well-being and the pleasurable life. Positive psychology has pleasure as a component of overall well-being, yet acknowledges that it by itself is not enough. Inclusion of happy pursuits in positive psychology is to complement utilitarianism philosophy. Or the third reference which comes into positive psychology is through William James. William James' widely read contribution to psychology in the Principle of Psychology has a chapter titled The Emotions, which is most relevant for positive psychology. He suggests that there are emotions which come after we have physically acted out. Take an example from his chapter where James states, and I quote, "Common sense says we lose our fortune, are sorry and weep. We meet a bear, are frightened and run. We are insulted by a rival, are angry and strike." The hypothesis here is to be defended says that this order of sequence is incorrect, that we feel sorry because we cry, angry because we strike, afraid because we tremble, and I unquote. James' example was one of the first to consider emotions and expressions to have a connection. His years of intertwining physiology, psychology, and philosophy still has an impact in philosophical issues surrounding the mind, the body, and the brain today. His years of intertwining physiology, psychology, and philosophy still has an impact in philosophical issues surrounding the mind, the body, and the brain. Another influence which affects positive psychology is humanistic psychology. In the continued environment of psychological theories of late 1950s and early 1960s, which based itself on psychoanalysis, behaviorism, and conditioning, emerged as a challenge in the field of humanistic psychology. It defined psychological study of a person as whole, which was a changed perspective to the prevalent theories. Humanistic psychologists believed that 1. It is the perception of world around and personal meanings which determines an individual. 2. Genes and environment are not the only influences on an individual. And lastly, all individuals directed and motivated internally to fulfill their human potential. Humanistic psychology attaches great significance to mental health, concentrating its theories on positive attributes such as happiness, contentment, ecstasy, kindness, caring, sharing, and generosity. It is a baseline understanding amongst the propagators of humanistic psychology that humans can exercise control on their destiny. Such approach towards life allowed viewing it as a process where individuals took it upon oneself to drive their growth and to achieve their potentials. Formation of this theory reflects the lack of research on positive side of living and life even in that period. Abraham Maslow, the pioneering psychologist, formed the term positive psychology in 1954. His model of self-actualization emphasized focus on human potential instead of frailties. It was through his effort alongside other eminent psychologists of the era that a positive approach towards psychology was developed. His major contribution to psychology as a whole were his theories of motivation, needs, self-actualization, and peak experience. He suggested the science of psychology has far more successful on the negative than on the positive side. It has revealed to us much about man's shortcomings, his illnesses, his sins, but little about his potentialities, his virtues, his achievable aspirations, or his psychological height, which is something that we need to look into. Now, we move forward to the origin of modern day psychology. It is evident at cursory examination of the various research literature that it was not in 1997 or 98 or 99 or for that matter 2000 that positive psychology began. It actually has been with us as a holistic and integrated body of knowledge which passed unrecognized and uncelebrated. In fact, the start of positive psychology has had a major achievement in consolidating, lifting up, and celebrating what we do know about what makes life worth living. as well as carefully delineating the areas where we need to do more. Positive psychology is its current recognition, tracing it back to Seligman's 1998 presidential address to the American Psychological Association. It was in 1950s where Csikszentmihalyi came to US to study psychology and found himself studying a branch of statistical mechanics under the banner of psychology. His aspiration to understand causes and factors enabling humans to be at optimal best remained unaddressed. His expectation was from that science of human being was plainly different. It was a chance vacation meeting between Seligman and Csikszentmihalyi in winter of 1997, followed by a sudden realization while gardening with daughter Nikki that Seligman realized that psychology has largely neglected the latter two of its three pre-World War missions. Not generally known at the time of psychology populace, there were three proposed tasks of psychology decided in pre-World War II. First was to cure mental illness, second was to make the lives of all people more productive and fulfilling, and third, identifying and nurturing high talent. Due to the aftermath of two world wars and the return of many psychologically impaired soldiers, research funding unfortunately focused on its first agenda, with the other two nearly forgotten. Based on this understanding and changed global scenario from the post-war period, Seligman initiated a psychologist's focus towards positive psychology using the platform of his APA presidency. Marty Seligman has been credited to be the father of modern positive psychology movement. Now, what are the aims and scope of positive psychology? Let's try and understand them one by one. The aim of positive psychology is to begin to catalyze a change in the focus of psychology from preoccupation only with repairing the worst things in life to also building positive qualities. This changes the approach by employing positive perspective to analyze the discipline of psychology and other subjects of scientific inquiry such as economics, sociology, anthropology, etc. It beckons us to view, understand and interpret human disillusionments such as loss, suffering, illness, distress, etc. through positives such as gain, well-being, health, fulfillment, connections, etc. Positive psychology concentrates on positive experiences at 3 time points. The first is the past, which is centering on well-being, contentment and satisfaction. The second is the present, which focuses on concepts such as happiness and flow experiences. And the third is the future, with concepts including optimism and hope. Not only does positive psychology distinguish between well-being across the time points, but it also separates the subject area into 3 nodes. The first being the subjective node, which encompasses things like positive experiences and states across past, present and future. For example, happiness, optimism and well-being. The second is the individual node, which focuses on characteristics of the good person. For example, talent, wisdom, love, courage, creativity. And communities, for example, altruism, tolerance and work ethics. Another way to classify 3 basic areas of study and practice of positive psychology can be further determined into 3 categories. First is positive emotions, which consist of contentment with the past, current happiness and hope for the future. The second is positive traits such as courage, resilience, curiosity, self-knowledge, integrity, compassion, creativity, etc. And thirdly, positive institution, such as community institution, which can benefit from focusing on the tools for developing positive psychology research. Positive psychology is not about celebrating selfishness, as it is criticized for at times. Instead, it has provided society with empirical evidence to substantiate that when the existing thoughts, ideas are viewed with renewed perspective, while playing special emphasis on positives growth of humans in all societies, then it appears to be more explicable. Above all, though positive psychology has challenged and rebalanced the deficit approach to living while connecting its findings to many different disciplines, thus its prominence, its future, its role cannot be neglected or criticized upon. Now let's look at the positive psychology in the current times. After understanding how positive psychology came into existence, let's look at its role and impact and accessibility in the current times. With the evolution of research and streams adopted in various communities, the discipline of psychology can be divided into a vast number of different subdisciplines. American Psychological Association, with its 56 branches, and British Psychological Society recognizes 9 charted areas of psychology, that is clinical, counseling, educational, forensic, health, neuropsychology, occupational, sport and exercise, and teachers and researchers in psychology. In this variance, we require to identify how and where does positive psychology fit in. Disagreement regarding whether positive psychology is a separate discipline itself or if it encompasses the entire field of psychology. For example, how positive psychology can be situated within mainstream psychological disciplines, and other links can be drawn to humanistic psychology, psychiatry, sociology, biology and subject areas are something that we need to study and research upon as a psychology student. Positive psychology has rapidly grown in the past few years and spans a multitude of areas and disciplines. Positive psychology has become a serious movement and has only galvanized increased interest in recent times, both popularly and seriously. It has been supported by an impressive and growing research corpus, an array of books including handbooks, numerous journals, special issues and journal articles, all dedicated to understand what positive psychology is about and representing and promoting the interest of positive psychology. There are conferences, journals, theme sessions, web pages and email discussion lists, wider interest through popular media including print, television and radio. Almost across media, positive psychology is being discussed. Positive psychology courses are now being included as part of existing degree programs and now also have a dedicated journal, the Journal of Positive Psychology, besides many other journals dedicated for the same. Its contribution through the decades has only increased, but it's gaining an enormous relevance in current times where the emphasis on positive traits is much higher. In its current state, positive psychology will bring about changes in approach towards enabling humans in a holistic manner. Positive psychology now stands at a crossroad and various factors will likely influence the path it takes. But it is evident from the direction spawning out that it will play a defining role in shaping the generations to come. Let's now consider the few future scenarios for positive psychology and assess the merits and risks associated with each one of them. A science to be which lost its way somewhere in the past, but positive psychology is once again at cusp of resurgence. Using the remarkable number of work done by plenty of psychologists along the way, it is at a point where it can integrate into continued specialization or catalyze a meta-psychological integration, else it may marginalize. It can evolve into a full science with its importance implied in human growth more than ever. While discussing that, we'll consider positive psychology's role in some future scenarios as proposed by several researchers, alongside assessing merits and risks associated with these. Given the possibility of boundless growth in this discipline, it is also imperative on researchers to create and leave information based on this discipline for future positive psychologists to make more informed decisions. It will also allow us to isolate states whereby positive psychology can be harnessed effectively to aid humans in their goals of flourish and fulfillment. First such thing that we need to look into is meta-psychological integration. Positive psychology could simply disappear if it would have achieved its aim of integration power at all disciplines of psychology. This meta-psychological integration would leave no separate need to sustain it as a discipline by itself. It will thus bring about an appreciation in all disciplines of psychology for full range of human functioning. This could happen through infusion of positive psychology in existing psychological practices. For example, by lending and merging principles of positive psychological perspectives into each of the professional disciplines. It would bring about integration of positive and negative aspects of human functioning and their understanding of interactions and interrelations into these disciplines. This will also enable psychology to assist and aid human growth model. Few of the professional disciplines even now can be said to have positive psychological aspects, such as health psychology, which emphasizes on prevention, or counseling psychology, which emphasizes on human development. But many of the disciplines are rooted in dysfunction models. Another example could be of positive organizational scholarship, which is concerned primarily with the study of especially positive outcomes, processes and attributes of organization and their members. The good starting point to be considered in respect of infusing positive psychology into the professional practice would be introducing it in school settings. If school psychology is initiated, it can serve as a connection point of positive psychology with optimal human development, influencing all other further developments and practice. Schools as a primary institution can serve as a vehicle for this development. That surely would constitute positive psychological success. With positive psychology having achieved its meta-psychological objective to catalyze a change in the focus of psychology from preoccupation only with repairing the worst things in life to also building positive qualities. Thus, as Sheldon and King says, positive psychology would be simply psychology. The second thing we can look into is integration with continued specialization. Positive psychology could bring about some of the integration yet evade a meta-psychological integration. It could serve as a theoretical guide providing practitioners with positive and negative aspects. It would continue to exist as a separate discipline and may engender shifts in psychological thinking that we do serve to integrate the positive and the negative aspects of human experience, but where structural barriers still remain. This could be driven by the economic model which, while desiring of alleviation of distress and dysfunction, wished not to invest in well-being and optimal functioning of human, thus depriving of opportunity for positive psychology to perform its potent purpose. However, even to have brought about this shift in psychological thinking so that these issues are even considered as issues could be considered a major event. With full integration not achieved, it may be envisaged that positive psychology research would continue into the positive side of human experience, continuing to redress the imbalance in psychological inquiry and research output. While this in itself may not be considered unduly problematic, it is subject to an important caveat. Such research must be conducted from an integrative perspective that seeks to understand the positive in relation to the negative and continues to strive to take the positive psychological message more broadly. In this direction, one would perceive positive psychology to continue its journey of influence without reaching its desired destination of success or abject failure of the theory. The third thing to look into is marginalization. Positive psychology in the bleakest direction could end up being a standalone discipline, marginalized, fragmented, and denied of its grandeur, design, and concept. As a standalone discipline, it would be a challenge to impress upon other disciplines the overarching reach of fulfillment it could achieve. If positive psychology is not able to connect with the existing models of psychology in practice, which is primarily concerned with alleviating human distress, positive psychology would remain critical of it but gain no more. It is such scenario where it would have failed to achieve its truest potential as an enabling science instead of pathological science. On this path, it would have lost a genuine prospect of catalyzing a change in the psychological thinking span various disciplines. This would be a squandered opportunity to infuse psychological disciplines with full human functioning perspective. Now let's also see what is the road ahead for positive psychology. In accepting the status of positive psychology currently, there could possibly be three directions to progress from here. This discipline can become a meta-discipline instead of existing status as a sub-discipline working in areas of strength and happiness and escape marginalization like humanistic psychology. Given the state that we live in, positive psychology will reach a critical phase sooner than later where factors would influence its further direction. These factors would be professional psychology training, research output, and most importantly, funding and stakeholder decisions. Let's first look at the professional psychology training. Undeniably, bringing positive psychology into perspective of young psychologists during their formative stages would enable them to view human functioning in positive light apart from the prevalent pathological approach. This would allow such psychologists to have a balanced view of situation, lending us to understand how the distress and fulfillment fits together. Once academic and applied psychology training begins to infuse the positive psychology perspective, the meta-psychological aspirations will be realized. The second factor to look into is the research output. It is imperative that positive psychology perspective generates quality research characterized by methodological rigor and practical relevance. Within its definition, positive psychology has immense popular value. People in general are interested in factors such as strength, virtue, health, and happiness. There is a constant endeavor within people to know ways and means to be happier, healthier, and fulfilled. This can thus lead positive psychology into becoming a populist science, lacking scientific rigor which should define it. it will be important to shun away populism and continue on path of scientific definition to process establish positive psychology as a potent scientific discipline which can enable professional practitioners with methodology to employ their interactions. For example, if the Journal of Positive Psychology becomes nothing more than a home for studies on the correlates of happiness, it will again have squandered its opportunity to become the beacon of positive psychology movement. In contrast, if it is recognized for integration of the positive psychological approach into psychology through the publication of empirical work combined with insightful theoretical integration, it will be considered as one of the major journals shaping the future of evolution psychology. Third and the most important factor which will shape the road ahead for positive psychology is funding and stakeholders' decisions. As everything else in today's times, positive psychology does not operate in isolation. It stands as exposed to economic model of relevance as anything or any other stream. Psychology is largely promoted by institutions, governmental or commercial, for general health care concerns. These institutions focus mostly on distress management in human beings and not in optimal well-being in general. Thus, it becomes more important for positive psychologists to therefore increase interactions with these institutions, bringing in them to know the impact of positive psychology perspective, the human and financial benefit of enabling a society with positive outlook and optimal functioning are immense, and therein lays the interest of institutions. These particular points need to be driven home very well by the practicing positive psychologists. If and when such interests are enlisted in positive psychology, it can shape its course for future relevance and funding, and more importantly, initiate building strength in society at large. Besides the points that we have discussed, there are certain issues and directions for the future of positive psychology that also need to be paid attention to. Future path of positive psychology can well consider some of the areas which are imaginable today. They may not be clear manifesto to adapt rather description of possibilities for it to look at along the way, but they still need to be paid attention to. The first one being synthesize the positive and the negative. Positive psychology can communicate with trauma and suffering and existential issues. The possibility of being able to bring both positive and negative in same analysis allows for positive psychologists to connect with other areas of psychology and other disciplines. If positive psychologists can strive to bring together, for example, mental health disorders with mental health growth, the outcomes would offer a powerful movement towards more integrative understandings of the human condition. The second factor, build on historical antecedents and existing knowledge. Positive psychology has a fortune of building upon earlier humanistic and existential ideas. It only serves better to learn from work done earlier, never forgetting its focus area. It can also imbibe a lot from scientific inquiries in areas of psychology, economics, sociology, anthropology, and science, to name a few. Third most important factor that we need to look into is integrate across levels of analysis. It also has much to gain through integrating the insights of neuroscience at the biological level with an understanding of the psychological and social markers. For example, consider the development of social neuroscience, which has allowed the understanding of the interactions between biological processes and social psychological processes, such as sociology, such as sociality, spirituality, and meaning making. Then we also need to build constituency. It is ever important to spread the import and impact of positive psychology among the powerful stakeholders. Pragmatic science allows for able constituency which will patronize good work leading to applicable outcomes for people. As positive psychology would be able to add to deliverables with applied benefits, its consumption will only increase. It is only common to assume that most of the human beings would aim for happier, fulfilled life, which by itself will become the strength for individuals and thus the society. It is within this realm that positive psychology can contribute immensely, enabling a better community. Work is already underway to promote the idea of national well-being accounts to complement economic indicators such as the gross domestic product in America. An extremely relevant example is of Bhutan, which coined the term GNH, which is gross national happiness, way back in 1972. It was designed as an indicator to measure quality of life and social development in more psychological and holistic terms than just the economic indicator like GDP. These are promising developments and speak to the potential for a positive psychological contribution through partnership and collaboration with established stakeholders. We as psychologists need to find more ways to promote and propagate through these stakeholders. Lastly, what we need to see is it going to be a description or a prescription? While dealing with these complex issues, care must be taken regarding the difference between describing something as good or prescribing it as good. On this distinction rests the difference between descriptive science of positive psychology and a prescriptive science of psychology. A descriptive science simply defines, delineates and documents its findings, leaving them free of value, judgment and admonition as to how they should be used. But positive psychology is far from value free, and even inherent within the name positive psychology is the implicit value assumption that positive equals to good. Medical researches may be prescriptive. For example, eating more fruit and vegetables is good for health. Consumption of alcohol and cigarette smoking is injurious to health. Since within medicine there is almost a universal agreement on what is good and what is not, yet within psychology defining something as good is much more of a subjective enterprise, and definitions or basis for deciding the basis of goodness, hence may often not be consistent with each other. Given the above, it is important to steer clear from becoming a prescriptive science, disallowing critical reflection, assuming inherent goodness in positive psychology position is not good for the health of positive psychology. As Diner puts it, and I quote, "Although we cannot pretend to be final arbiters about what is good, at least we can be players in helping society define what is positive." Unquote. It would be better to become a catalyst in initiating debates and discussions on the merits of a position. Such atmosphere will allow someday for us to discover and unite principles of positive and good, which may build a meta-theoretical foundation of optimal human experience. Now we move towards the end and summarize what we have learned so far in the module. At the end of it, we should be able to understand that positive psychology is the science of well-being and optimal functioning. It has a rich history with ancient Greek philosophy, humanism, and several other areas of mental health to its credit. Humanistic psychology is a close cousin of positive psychology, the main difference being positive psychology's focus is on the use of scientific method. Whereas the study of positive psychology can be classified in three categories: the time zone, past, present, future; the subject area, subjective mode, individual mode, and the group mode; and thirdly, the areas of study, positive emotions, positive individuals, and positive institutions. In order to succeed the future challenges, positive psychology needs to go interdisciplinary in its approach. The formal training, research output, and the funding for research are some of the crucial factors that would decide the course of positive psychology in the future. The areas that theorists and practitioners of positive psychology can look into the future includes: first, taking along both traditional and modern perspectives of psychology for the welfare of humankind. Second, it can draw upon the wealth of research available to align it better with existing knowledge of psychology. Third, it needs to go across the specialization spectrum to make it more effective. Fourth, it needs to reach out to policymakers and agencies who matter and make its presence and applications more impactful.